Legal experts speculating it may take decades. Democratic strategist and civil litigator Michelle Thomas and Republican strategist and president of Winning Republican Strategies, Aaron Evans, are with me right now. Thank you both for being here. You know, President Trump promising the largest deportation this nation has ever seen, but there are plenty of skeptics. In fact, Axios is reporting the criminals that President Trump wants to deport would number less than 0.5%. or 8,400 cases currently in immigration courts out of the millions of people in this country illegally. Aaron, do you believe it will be a challenge to track down violent immigrant criminals?
Yeah, look, I think that ultimately much of local law enforcement will cooperate with the Trump administration on this. And I think that what we'll see is, state by state, we'll see much more cooperation than obviously we've got a small handful of mayors saying that they want to have sanctuary cities and they're not going to work with the Trump administration. But, and the other thing that we have to recognize with these statistics is, ultimately it's what they are tracking and what they are reporting on. And so, and the other thing that I would like to remind people of is, regardless of the percentage that we're talking about here, every crime that is committed by someone who should not be here to begin with, that's a crime that we wouldn't have if we actually had secure borders. And so, if you're the victim of some of these crimes, if you're the person that has been robbed, raped, assaulted, then obviously, you find out that, look, this is a crime from someone that would not have even been here had we actually been a nation of laws. That's frustrating to the American people, and that's what President Trump is going to fix.
Michelle, Axios also reporting that the numbers they're discussing, that 0.5%, doesn't include about 400,000 undocumented convicts currently serving time in U.S. prisons and jails, and they wouldn't be deported without serving their sentences. Who do you believe will be sent back first?
Well, we've certainly heard that the administration is targeting these alleged criminals. I think part of the problem is that, one, the legal system dealing with immigration is already quite burdened as it is. I believe there's about 3.7 million cases of backlogged cases in the immigration system. So then we're talking about whether we are going to abridge or compromise the due process rights of the persons who are here in this country. So I think there's a lot of logistical issues. We can talk about the cost of this targeting and mass deportation. We're looking at it costing possibly billions of dollars, not to mention the effect on certain industries and sectors of the workforce that rely on some of these undocumented workers. So, I think there's a lot of logistical issues here and legal issues that the administration has to overcome in order to focus on its target of deporting these alleged criminals.
Yeah, and a lot of people would point to the costs that are already being incurred in the billions for cities like New York and Chicago as a result of that burden you're talking about. Aaron, Laken Riley's murder was noted in that Axios article as an individualized case that Mr. Trump and conservatives elevated to justify mass deportations. Axios would likely not have reported any number of police-involved civilian deaths as individualized, elevated cases meant to justify police reform. What are your thoughts about using these cases and saying these are rare instances and that perhaps we should not use them as evidence that America's crime is up in part due to illegal entry?
Look, I think ultimately we have a lot of spin happening right now, from those who are resisting kind of this direction that, frankly, the majority of American people said they approve of when they elected President Trump this November. But also, more importantly to note is every single, and this is something I think we forget a lot, every single person who is here illegally has already committed a crime to be here. We're by definition, if you're here illegally, you've committed a crime. Your first introduction to the United States was us saying, hey, you didn't follow the rules, you took a shortcut, you're here illegally, but that law didn't matter. And so, and again, I want to go back to, I think when we're talking about these different crimes, if you are the victim or you are the family of those victims, that case mattered to them. And, and regardless, we'll never solve all crimes, but ultimately, if we can save one life, or we can save one young lady from being raped, or we can save, one robbery, any of those things, if you are the victim, that case matters and that statistic matters. And so I think for Axios and different ones to downplay the urgency and the importance of just saving one life or saving two lives.
Thanks so much for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.